enough about it, and maybe my colleague here could comment on that much better. I don't think you can easily say it's the formation of a middle class itself that reduces fertility levels. I think that is also quite country specific, and I agree that in some countries, especially the lower income countries, because of the financial crisis, but also food crisis and so on, the middle class is at peril, and you see actually more people at poverty than a rising middle class. That is not the same case for countries like China and to a certain extent India. So again, that's a very country-specific approach you have to look at. Second, I do think education is an enormously important instrument for this. I think all research and all the outcomes of our evaluations show very clearly that where there is education in girls, girls' education makes an enormous, has an enormous influence about how many children a woman gets, how her free choice is on how many children she wants to have, and obviously these two are also related to each other. And I don't think there is any reason to believe that that is not the case. To the contrary, I think it is one of the best investments when you want to come to a human rights-based approach to family planning. That doesn't take away that there is no silver bullet. Of course, as I said, there are ideologies, there are views on the role of women in society, also on the role of men, about fertility. I mean, it's close to the deepest of our thoughts and cultures and ways of thinking, and they are in fluctuation. I don't think there is one deterministic way to think that all at once we can explain that. And I'll be happy to do that, but it is maybe for another lecture series. But of course, you can have certain situations in which there is definitely a regress on this, in which the rights of women are curtailed. You see it in part of the Middle East. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see the same amount of oppression of women that you see lately. But then again, not for everybody. Also, that is very country specific. But in general, I would say education, the lesson is education for girls is an enormous investment in the type of things we're talking about, as is economic growth more generally, as is the fostering of good family planning processes and plans. The last point on the 10 million people, and look, I wasn't trying to say that, I don't want to say there need to be more people and then, you say it's all the human rights-based approach. I don't think so. I don't think the main issue in this country, in this planet, is not that there are too many people. What I have said is that with present levels of population growth and present production and consumption levels and present ways of distributing the goods in the world. Let me give you one example. It's a bit populistic, but we tend to do that these days in the Netherlands. The amount of bonuses that were given after the financial economic crisis, I'm not talking about 2 years ago, the amount of bonuses that were given this year to the big bank leaders in the world is more than the total development cooperation in the world. I mean, that's the reality of it. We're talking about these type of figures. Of course, that's a populistic argument. But what I would say to you is this. I am not sort of implicitly trying to say that there are too many people in the world, and I limit that secretly by family planning, but I call it a human rights-based approach. I don't think there are too many people in the world. I don't think there will be too many people in the world. I think there are sensible policies that come from the fact that I think people have the right to sequence and to choose how many children they want, and I do see a risk if the present consumption and production patterns are developing and distributed in the way they are at the moment. And I think in that context, family planning is an important human rights instrument. It's an instrument to reduce maternal health, and it gives the choice to individual people and societies as a whole to make their own choices on population policy.
Thank you very much. Here we come to a very mature and broad approach which we need exactly for this century. For Sinding.
Thank you. I think that the question from the needy director that I perhaps wasn't sufficiently clear in what I was saying, because I think you've mischaracterized what I did say. I was very careful not to say that reducing population growth is the way to economic development. I feel equally strongly and said that countries which succeed in reducing rapid rates of population growth have a better chance of achieving sustained economic growth than those that don't, and that's my position. I also think that there is a virtuous circle relationship between them, that as countries grow more prosperous, fertility rates decline, and as fertility rates decline, opportunities for economic development improve. And where one intervenes in the cycle to make a difference almost doesn't matter. Once the process begins, it tends to sustain itself. So I think we can agree on that. The other point, I certainly wouldn't make the argument that having a large number or proportion of young men is a recipe for civil disorder. I would argue that having a large number of jobless young men without prospects of jobs is a recipe for tensions and perhaps for disorder. So I thank you for raising a question which enables me to clarify the point I was trying to make. On the regress on women's rights, I very much agree with your concern. And I also agree that in some countries we are seeing very unfortunate regression with respect to women's rights. But I think that what we're seeing is a backlash as a consequence of enormous progress. And I tend to try to take a somewhat longer historical view of this, to say that because the progress over the last 25 to 30 years has been so enormous with respect to women's rights, it would be foolish to expect that there would be no negative reaction to that. And I think that's what we're seeing. But it's really a little bit the symptom of success rather than a cause for alarm, because I think that the international women's movement is unstoppable and that it will continue to make progress in the years going forward. I think those who are trying to stop it, who are backlashing, are sort of the last gasp of male conservatism, and men are going to lose this battle. The question about whether we didn't create a bigger tent at Cairo by bringing the two sides together, I wish that were true. And I think that today we are seeing finally that coalescing of the two sides that I wish had happened at Cairo but didn't. Because what happened at Cairo was a demonization of population policies and a demonization of the history of family planning, which led in the immediate aftermath to a rejection of much of what had been accomplished in the previous 20 years, and a driving apart of the two communities. And it's taken almost 2 decades to bring us together to the point where we now can talk about our mutual interests as opposed to our mutual hostility. I think today we are. I think finally we have reached the point of saying that a rights-based approach is absolutely the right way to go, and it is all right to talk about population issues and population pressures where they are real and meaningful. It was not possible after Cairo to talk about population pressures. It simply wasn't, and least of all in this country. So I think that we're at a much better place today than we were 20 years ago with respect to that particular battle. I think what Cairo did was establish a much higher moral plane and ethical basis for programs than we had before, and it was a tremendous step forward in that regard. But it didn't come without a price, and I think that's where we are today. On the issue of old age security and children as